Okay, it works. That took longer than I'm proud of. Zombies are a favourite of horror, a unique take with the antagonist being an uncontrollable illness that leads to a fate far worse than death. And I just think that's kind of cool. But what is the likelihood of this actually happening? Could it be like The Last of Us? And if not a fungus like cordyceps, is there a microbe that could cause this kind of zombie apocalypse devastation? Let's look into it. So I'm watching The Last of Us. Great show, by the way. This isn't any kind of series review. But in the intro sequence of the very first episode, we're thrown straight into an interview where some folks are talking about microbial threats that humans should be fearful of. And there's this fella there who I forgot to look up the actor's name, but I mostly recognize as the love interest for Gwyneth Paltrow in the movie Sliding Doors. So Gwyneth's boo, he makes a statement about how there are fungi that don't seek to kill, but to control. And well, I guess that triggered this video, because it's just a weird way to view it. In the decade that I've been working in microbiology, I've never once gotten the vibe that microbes have an agenda outside of their basic needs, which are essentially resources and reproduction, if we want to look at it really simply. So is the idea that we could end up with the infected having an aggressively strong desire for human flesh that wasn't a part of their actual life cycle valid? Firstly, we should cover some basic taxonomy. For those who are unsure, taxonomy is just generally the way things are grouped and classified in science, but I'm sure there's uses for it in other places. I'm just not privy to them. Now, you may remember the slide that's up from high school science. So in taxonomy, there's a bunch of groups, going from domain being the biggest groups all the way down to subspecies. So if we focus on the ideas of kingdom, phylum, class, order, and then most specifically on this video for family, genus, and species, we're going to go through just a little bit of what we're actually going to talk about as a species. Just a side note, you'll notice I've chucked some words here in blue. That's just a little memory jigger for anyone who might have trouble remembering this order. So we have an order called Hippocrellis, and within this order, there's two families. One is Cordycepitaceae, and the other's Orpheocordycepitaceae. Going down from there, you can see the genuses. We have Cordyceps and Orpheocordyceps, and then there's your species. Orpheocordyceps unilateralis is the actual species that the mycologist in the second episode identifies when she looks down the microscope. I know generally folks use the term cordyceps, and that has become a colloquial term. I believe this is because of it being the first group to be classified in these. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Cordyceps bassiana, which is sometimes referred to as Bavaria bassiana, was the first species identified properly and classified. They actually infect crickets, and we are definitely talking about the zombie ant virus. That's the one that gets mentioned all the time. So for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on Orpheocordyceps unilateralis to keep things simple. So as far as experts know, there's believed to be about 600 species of these cordyceps or Orpheocordyceps type fungi. But mycology taxonomy is actually this really super crazy world full of disagreements and ever-evolving definitions and categories. So the species Orpheocordyceps unilateralis is where we're going to focus and jump into, but I just want to point out there's so many of these. Zombie ants, zombie spiders, zombie crickets. It's nightmare fuel for nightmare fuel, essentially. There are even ones that on their scorecard it says, hey, we're a parasitic infection for other fungi in some weird, like, mushroom cannibalistic fever dream. Orpheocordycepitaceae is a family of parasitic fungi. This means they're an organism that lives in close association with the host, and they are known to generally be entomopathogenic fungi, meaning they kind of like the arthropod family, particularly insects. They are also known to be endoparasitic. This means that they live within the tissues and the organs of their host. This is in contrast to, say, ticks and fleas and lice, which are ectoparasitic. They tend to jump onto a host on the outside, kind of latch on or burrow into a hair follicle and gain nutrients that way, while they basically hitchhike a free ride and some extra protection off a bigger organism. In the case of endoparasites, like Orpheocordyceps, the strategy behind growing within the host is generally to allow the growth and maturation of the fungi itself. It's completing its life cycle using the host as part of that system. So it's completely fair that we do see behavioral changes in organisms. as the fungi does need the organism to sometimes do things that it normally would not. Cordyceps unilateralis. It's exhausting to say, but it's known a nickname for essentially zombifying ants. The fungi alters the infected ant's behavior in such a way that it supports its own life and continues its own life cycle through it. This is accomplished by infecting the ants, which all begins with fungi spores. For those who don't know, spores are a reproductive unit of fungi. You can think of them as similar to a seed. It's not perfect, but it's a very good analogy because they are essentially also just a little kind of shelled in bit of DNA, genetic material. They're in this casing and they're waiting for germination. Fungi somewhere at the end of their life cycle release a bunch of spores. These spores float on through the air, and if they're lucky, they find themselves landing on the correct substrate. In this case, ants. Once on the exoskeleton, they basically chill about waiting for the right conditions for germination. And once it's on the substrate that they want, really those conditions come down to temperature and water availability. Once that's all good, if it happens, germination will occur. Now in fungi, instead of taproots like we have in seeds, you have hyphae. You might have heard the term mycelium. This is kind of like a more complex networking of hyphae in a way. Mycelium's a little bit more grouped up. For the sake of this, you've got a spore, it germinates, and it pops out a hyphae, which starts just like boring into the actual insect crazily until it gets into the inner sanctum of the ant's exoskeleton, its muscle tissues, and all of that. From here, it continues to grow and spread and further infect the host tissues. And once this parasitic infection has fully developed, the behaviors of the infected ants start to change. They have innate fears within them of heights, and this just seems to go away. They like to stay near their nest and in colonies doing their little ant army things. But that again goes away and they kind of wander off. Now, once they've found or chosen their forbidden paradise, they basically grab their mandibles or teeth or whatnot and they just grab onto this leaf and they hang there. They just hang there chilling out as the fungi continues to devour and take over their body. Over time, normally around 4 to 10 days, their untimely death comes about as a fruiting body erupts through their head and ends up killing them, if they're not already dead. This is where the spores are carried, and as this gets up there, goes into its full maturation of the fruiting body, which is essentially a mushroom. A macrofungi fruiting body is a mushroom, and they release spores as the reproductive structure, just a side note. But as that happens, it spreads more out in the hopes that it will go forth and infect more ants in close by colonies. Then that way this cycle can just repeat over and over and over again, and this can devastate ant colonies. It's where you just get hundreds, if not thousands, if not more, of these suspended, petrified fungal ants with disturbing mushroomy heads. So that's all well and good, but what is actually going on here? From the outside, it appears as though the ants are infected and being controlled, and it appears that they're losing all these innate parts of them to go do the fungi's bidding. But what is probably not as well understood is that this is not done via direct stimulation of the brain. Many believe it to be a final infection of the fungus growing into the brain with its hyphae. However, it grows around the brain and not into it. The main thing that it seems to do is actually grow into the muscles and destroy the motor neurons so that it can then grow into the muscle fibers directly and stimulate them. This is done probably through a chemical process from what people have observed. And the hyphae webbing that will form around the brain will also release chemicals. However, it's not really thought that these zombify the ant in the way that you're probably thinking. They don't take over the ant and control it. It's probably much more something like that induces calmness or maybe even psychoactiveness, because fungi are pretty good at that. Either way, it induces a calmness and compliance more likely to the ants so that they're not freaking out as they're getting trapped in their own bodies quite as hard. One way to think of this might be kind of like a scopolamine for ants, but point being, the brain itself is not actually ever infected by the fungus. It might have some side effects from chemical release and stimulation. So with this, I guess we're left with a bunch of questions, such as, are the ants aware, unwilling to do the bidding, but unable to act against it, trapped in their own bodies? And how do they coordinate various muscle fibers in such a way as to complete complex movements, such as walking? There's 6 legs there, man, in ants. That's hectic. And I guess you're probably also thinking, how couldn't this be the zombie seed? That's wild. It's taking over muscles and doing some Pickle Rick stuff like on the on the cockroach. So I guess the main question we can actually cover here is, how could this not be the zombie seed? And there's probably two parts to that question and therefore two answers. Firstly, could Ophiocordyceps unilaterus actually infect humans? And if it could, would this end up with a flesh-eating, cannibalistic, reanimated, decomposing set of corpses rolling around causing the apocalypse? In short, sadly, probably not. It's really not very likely in this reality and within our life cycles. Firstly, because species tend to differ quite dramatically when you're even comparing mammals to mammals. So if you take mammals to arthropods, that's just a whole different bag, man. They're so different. And because of this, there's a lot of factors which are not going to line up, making us a suitable substrate for this fungus. Cordyceps have adapted over a vast period of time to effortlessly infect these ants. Ants are cold-blooded. Humans, I hope, warm-blooded, otherwise you're a corpse. And well done on watching this video. Maybe you saw zombies and you just wanted to do some self-reflection, but probably not the video for you. So we're warm-blooded, and fungi in general don't love how warm we are. Bacteria, mwah, they love it. We are like a walking incubator for bacteria. But when it comes to fungi, there are some specially adapted ones which are just happy to do their bidding on us. Candida's a good example. There's few interesting foot funguses, but in general, fungi want a much cooler environment, which is why you tend to only see really dense fungal infections like mucormycosis of the lungs in immunocompromised people. Not to say you can't get say mold allergies or fungal allergies, but that is really similar to hay fever in a lot of ways. It's a antigen response based on an allergen. It can grow into worse things with chronic exposure, but generally, mold allergy is just that. It's a mold allergy. Can be severe. We all know allergies can be terrible, but generally, you're not going to get yourself growing random molds in your everyday life. It's pretty rare. So ants being cold-blooded, and there being more insects than there are humans, it's fair to say that there would be a far better alternative if something happened to the ants or the fungus got stressed in a way it couldn't affect the ants anymore. They would jump, but they'd likely jump to something that's already being infected by some of this fungi's cousins. Crickets, spiders, all those things. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying that our brains and our biochemistry function very, very differently. Now, I'm not saying that just because these fungi have masterfully adapted to infecting insects that there couldn't be a move to humans, but it's not a logical jump, and it's a huge jump. However, theoretically, with time and enough stresses over just a redonkulous period so long, these adaptations could probably be made, but then again, it still probably isn't the best contender for a zombie apocalypse outbreak. And the most glaring reason, I believe, for that is the fact that the consumption of another plausible host has absolutely nothing to do with the life cycle and desire to reproduce. It would be more likely that we would end up with humans zombified in a similar way to the ants. They're not going to be aggressive, they're not going to be looking to bite other ants, they're going to be looking for a fungi vacation spot for them to grow and spread more spores. So it just seems like they'd make us our minions and not their zombies if it did jump to us. The fact that they're considering it could jump not only from ants to humans, but from making a passive minion through to a human rage virus zombie, it's just a little fantastic. Now, maybe there's something weird that could happen that could force that to go quicker. Cordyceps has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for a long time, and maybe there's some old abandoned traditional Chinese medicine warehouse thing just chilling there with stock that's in some weird place, and it is slowly bubbling away to cause this issue. I just kind of doubt it though. So with the behavioral changes being unlikely to really cause what happens in The Last of Us, is there something that we should consider that's more scary? What if I told you there was already a microbe that you more than likely know of that infects humans, induces odd behaviors, and has a near 100% kill rate? I think we need to talk about rabies. Rabies is named after the Latin word for madness, and it is a disease caused by a virus called lyssavirus. Lyssavirus is a zootonic virus, which means it's caught from animals, in this case bats. We'll just go over a bit of viruses because viruses are really cool. So you have a basic unit of life known as the cell. But with viruses, we're kind of just looking at lone genetic material. It's essentially a genetic code wrapped up, waiting to hijack. They can also look super gnarly in sci-fi. Check these out. What the fuck? Look at this one. Jesus. So unlike fungi, bacteria, protozoa, which are living components on their own, viruses actually need a host to be doing anything other than chilling. In order to survive and reproduce, they rely on hijacking an organism and using that organism's own cells and biochemical mechanisms to reproduce the virus's genetic material. Kind of like when birds or lizards convince another bird to sit on its bird eggs and then hatch these ugly birds and call into the mom, but they take care of them because you gotta love the ugly duck, and then suddenly it's not their babies. So they invade the cell, take control of its organelles, and start multiplying their virulent proteins. Once this family of viruses is big enough, the cell will die through a process called lysis, which is essentially the cell kind of just bursting, and all the viruses will come on out and go forth and yonder and infect a bunch more other cells, repeating the process over and over. It's this disruption to cells and this high rate of cell death which causes a lot of the illness and symptoms within viruses. So some of this might seem really familiar, kind of like the parasitic fungi we just talked about, Orpheocordyceps. And viruses can be loosely defined as an obligate parasite, but the term obligate parasite essentially just means that it's lacking its own biological equipment to metabolize, synthesize proteins, reproduce, and just go on and live a loner life. It kind of needs to be in association to have any relevance. So we have lyssavirus, which can come from bats. It often gets spread to humans through dogs. Once a host is infected, let's say a human, the virus hijacks the cells and starts going wild. Now, rabies induces a bunch of behavioral symptoms. The symptoms will start with a fever and a headache, which is very common for a lot of things. Now, considering there can be anywhere between a 3-week and a 1-year incubation period, it's hard to sometimes pinpoint exactly what's going on until it's too late. Once these symptoms start to progress, behavioral symptoms start to pop up quite extremely. There are things such as hydrophobia which come with this. Hydrophobia is an intense aversion or fear of water. The body of the host will visibly panic. They'll shake, they won't want to bring the water to themselves. They will have spasms in their throat and larynx, stopping the swallowing. And their salivary glands start building up more saliva and stopping them from swallowing the saliva as well. This has to do with the fact that the virus is transmitted through the bite. So the virus knows it wants to concentrate itself. It doesn't want to get diluted and it wants to get to another host. As such, stopping the host from drinking water, dehydrating them. The stronger the concentration, the more likely the infection will spread when the infected bites another being. As well as this, it seems to change people's demeanor, mostly in a Cujo aggressive type of sense, but it can also lead to extreme lethargy. This is known as dumb rabies, and it affects about 20% of patients. It's probably easier to deal with, but it's got the same symptoms overall, which is death. No matter what kind of rabies you get, ragey or dumb, you're gonna end up with the exact same thing happening. The virus heads straight for the central nervous system and up towards the brain. And you start to get symptoms such as partial paralysis, anxiety, insomnia, confusion, agitation, abnormal and aggressive behaviors, paranoia, terror, fear, hallucinations. This all accumulates into a coma and eventually death caused by encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain. There are around 60,000 deaths per year, and unfortunately the biggest spreader between wildlife and humans is dogs. Though I believe in some countries like America, they've been pretty good at eradicating the issues in dogs, I assume through vaccinations. I'm in Australia, and we don't actually tend to have rabies proper. We're considered rabies free. I say it this way because we have something called Australian bat lyssavirus. Australian bat lyssavirus doesn't really spread to dogs or things that humans have a lot of contact with. And so I think there's been maybe 4 to 6 cases ever, but they all also have ended in death. We have medicines that we can use for vaccinating and for even direct exposure therapy if someone feels they've been bitten by a bat or a rabid dog or something. But if you don't get that sorted before the symptoms start, it will take between 2 and 10 days from the point when symptoms first started occurring until the death of the infected person. Now, I'm not saying that this is the absolute zombie apocalypse virus that's going to just kill all zombie apocalypse virus conspiracies. It still does need to take a lot of steps, but a lot less steps than a fungus like Ophiucordyceps or cordyceps or anything like that. Viruses quite like us, they're fine with it. We've got a lot of cells for them to hijack, they're fine with that. It's already pretty contagious. And the thing that gets me though is the behavior of rage, confusion, and then the absolute awareness of the virus when it comes to accumulating a concentration of the virus in the saliva and knowing to get the host to bite another. That to me is some zombie fucking shit, and I am petrified of rabies. There are a lot of other microbes with wrath, and I don't want to make this too long being my first video because I am about to learn to edit. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm just gonna generally chuck in there for fun a little bit about toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasma gondii is a protozoa which causes an illness called toxoplasmosis. This is commonly associated with cats and cat litter, which is why it's typically said to avoid cleaning cat litter if you're pregnant or immunocompromised. Quickly, I should mention protozoa, another weird little thing. Look at this little guy, he's so cute. They're basically a unicellular organism, but different to bacteria. If you think of it in a real general way, bacteria are a cell and protozoa are like a little one-celled critter. The protozoa, Toxoplasma gondii, is a really awesome parasite responsible for toxoplasmosis. As a parasite, it goes through a host life cycle. But it's the kind of parasite which does it with two. So it pops from one to the other in a flowing sequence, which helps it do its thing. Essentially, it needs to go through the cat's digestive system to reproduce. But once pooped out, it needs to get back into the cats. The way it does this is it's adapted to infecting rats in a different way in which it functions in the cat. When it affects rats, it seems to cause them to lose an innate fear of the cats. They'll go and seek them out. They'll want to play with them. They even seem to like the ammoniary smell of cat urine. And because of this, they'll eventually die due to the cat because they're easy prey. Really cool, double host system, but we know that humans can catch this, and additional studies have shown that some humans have a persistent, chronic version of this parasite. Possibly as many as 1 in 5, which is fucking wild to me. 20% of the population? Seriously? Okay, Gondii. What they've found in infected humans, though, is a high affinity to cats. Less intelligence to the point of a trackable 10 IQ point lower score, and a much more social want. They're far more social. Now, it's fair to say that maybe people with a lower IQ have a little bit less awareness of what they're doing, and maybe they say rougher with kitty litter and don't think about aerosolized bacteria in the poop, all that type of stuff. It's not what I'm concerned about right now. What I'm thinking about is the fact that probably most of the crazy cat ladies in the world are actually infected by a parasite that's making them love cats. So that's just fun and freaks the hell out of me immensely. Because what if the apocalypse is just us declaring cats the overlords of this earth as they reach their final apotheosis? What should you take away from this? Probably that microbes are really scary. I do honestly believe that a huge mistake in human logic is believing that we're the most evolved beings on this planet just because we're the best at destroying it under the guise of our own evolution. It feels a little bit like those folks who walk around getting really, really into saving the planet. Now, I'm not saying that message isn't important. I am all for it. But what gets me is that I feel their goal is a little bit muddled in the message they try and carry. They're not trying to save the planet. The planet will be here long after we're gone. Honestly, even bacteria was here before us, and they'll be here when we're gone. You're not trying to save the planet. You're trying to save you. Other species as well, but you're trying to save life. The Earth's still going to be a floating rock in the middle of nowhere, no matter what. So be afraid of microbes, wash your hands, and stay excellent, I guess. I should probably chuck in like a little something to say, hey, I'm Sophie. This is my first video, so it's a bit awkward. I've never recorded myself in a camera before, so it's a learning curve, and I haven't done it yet, but I'm gonna apologize now for some shoddy editing. Also a learning curve, but I've been wanting to do this project for a while, mostly because I have a lot of thoughts in my head and I just want to ramble about them, and no one's willing to listen in my life. They're sick of me, and I get that. So I've started this channel. As you can see, it's called, I've been meaning to look into that. My goal here is to just do loose and simplistically explained deep dives into almost anything. We'll give this a go, and I'm hoping to upload every few weeks to a month. If you could like and subscribe if you want to and didn't find me utterly annoying, I would really appreciate that because I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Thanks!